it's clear to all of us that our democracy is in danger. Indeed, democracy has been in retreat around the world for most of the 21st century. Today, more countries and more people are governed non-democratically than at any point in the last 20 years. And here in the United States, we have been far from immune to this trend. 15 years ago, the research organization Freedom House rated our democracy as having a 94 out of 100 on its scale of the quality of a country's democracy. Today, we're an 83, which puts us on par with countries like Romania and below countries like Argentina and Mongolia. In fact, U.S. democracy has been declining faster than almost any other country on the planet, with the exception of some of the canonical examples of recent democratic backsliding like Hungary and Turkey and India and Brazil. Attitudes among Americans about democracy, they're eroding too. 30 years ago, only 1 in 16 Americans said they would favor something like military or army rule in this country. Today, that number has jumped to 1 in 5. So, we have seen a rising tide of autocrats come to power in recent years, both abroad and, yes, of course, here at home. So, what do these autocrats do when they come to power to dismantle democracies? Across the world, from Venezuela to Turkey, Hungary to Poland, they have the same playbook everywhere. First, they politicize independent institutions like the civil service, law enforcement, and the military. Second, they spread disinformation. Third, they aggrandize executive power and they undermine checks and balances. Fourth, they quash dissent. Fifth, they try to delegitimize vulnerable and marginalized communities. This has been the tyrant's favorite tool since antiquity. Because if you can pit people against each other on the basis of race or religion or national origin or sexual orientation, it's easier to pick their pockets of money and power. Sixth, they stoke violence, not just to intimidate opponents, but also because fear, especially for our physical safety and the safety of the ones we love, makes us all more susceptible to the false promises of strongman rule. And lastly, they corrupt elections. So what might happen next? Well, we're already seeing it. The people who tried to corrupt and overturn the 2020 election are now engaged in an effort to make sure that the next time succeeds where last time their effort failed. In 2020, we saw attempts to suppress the vote. We saw attempts to prematurely claim victory and falsely allege fraud. We saw attempts to barrage courts with frivolous litigation to amplify those false claims of fraud and delay certifying any winner. We saw efforts to pressure state legislatures to step in and assert their will in place of the will of the people of their states, and ultimately, we saw efforts to get Congress to declare the loser as the winner. Thankfully, in 2020, all those efforts were thwarted by citizens, by civil society, by our democratic institutions, by Democrats and Republicans standing together in defense of our republic. But today, changes in state laws around the country and efforts to replace election officials of both parties with people who would be more willing to corrupt a future election are part of a campaign to make the next effort to corrupt an election succeed where the last one failed. But what can we do about it? We can do what we've done before because we've succeeded at this in the past. So first, importantly, build a broad coalition. Build a broad coalition because, and this is the lesson from Eastern Europe, when democracy is in existential peril, people who normally disagree about policy or about politics have to put those differences aside to unite in defense of democracy. Indeed, that is what thwarted rising authoritarianism in places like the Czech Republic. A Polish MP, Polish minister from their government, was talking to a group of democracy organizations in 2017 and was asked, what's the number one piece of advice that Eastern Europeaners who have been facing down autocracy in the modern era have for us here in the United States? And what did she say? She said, don't let the pro-democracy coalition fracture. Second, every institution has a role to play. Our democracy cannot protect itself. Our founders did not create a system that was self-executing. What they did was they gave us tools that a free people can and must use to protect and perpetuate self-government, right? What did Benjamin Franklin famously say when leaving the Constitutional Convention? He was asked what they had created, and he said, a republic if we can keep it, which is all of us. CEOs and business institutions, faith communities, media entities, government actors, entertainment, and voters and citizens, all of us. Because democracy cannot survive when those within it sit on the sidelines. And then third, we stop the ceiling from caving in, and then we reform our structures to make them more democratic. Because the most urgent threat is that an upcoming election will be corrupted, and we all have to get under that cracking wooden ceiling beam and hold it up with our hands. But that's just to buy the time to replace that cracking wooden ceiling beam with a steel one, and time to reform the structures of our democracy that are insufficiently representative, that are insufficiently democratic, because we've never had a perfect democracy in this country. But for it to survive long term, we've got to get back on the path of perfecting it. And the good news is we can do this. We are the rare nation that turned an autocrat out of power using the normal processes of our democracy. That rarely happens around the world, and yet we here in the United States have been able to do this. But the window to act is closing. This is our generation's greatest calling. We all need to rise to it.